Hello, hello. It's Mandy, Never Effing Settle. I'm very excited because even though it took forever to get it, my shirt finally came for Pride Month. I might even leave the house today to be able to wear it out in the public. I'm very excited. Quick clarification from last week's video. I was thinking about it in the shower where I do my best thinking. And when I say you cannot yoga your way out of PTSD, complex PTSD, trauma, and so forth, what I mean by that is that I'm talking about the way us Westerners tend to do yoga, right? So the kind of yoga you do in the morning with your besties and then you go to brunch and get mimosas after, right? Which I am totally down for. But what's really needed is a true yoga practice, okay? So I just want to clarify that because I was thinking about it and sometimes I forget that y'all aren't in my head and that you don't know what I mean when I say things like that. I do meditate and I do yoga. And I'm a huge advocate for it. And it has saved so many people from long before we even knew what CBT and EMDR and all those other fun acronyms were, when we had all these fancy modalities. It's been saving people long before any of us were around. So yes, you can, but we're talking about it in that way, a true yoga practice where you learn to isolate each muscle group, relax that muscle, and not to bore you, but to relax the muscles specifically that surround the ends of the vagus nerve, which is what creates the threat response, which is often what triggers that hyper-awareness or hypervigilance in a PTSD patient. So, just wanted to clarify that. Yoga is phenomenal. But when I say you're not going to yoga your way out of that, what I mean is I don't want somebody to think they're a failure because they tried a couple of yoga classes at the local YMCA and they didn't cure themselves of PTSD and think they have failed. Just wanted to clarify. Anywho, moving on. So today I briefly want to talk to you a little bit about triggers. Triggers are a word that you guys have probably been hearing all over the place, right? But there's a clarification that really needs to be made because lately I noticed that people are using triggers as an explanation for things that they don't do and things that the people around them aren't supposed to do. Now, let's clarify. Triggers are a stressor that can push people into a threat response, push them into destructive behavior, and the like. It's totally reasonable to tell members of your family, your partner, your spouse, even your kids maybe, hey, I'm working through this, but blank is a trigger for me. If we could avoid that, that would be awesome, right? However, triggers are not something that you tell the general public and expect other people to adapt to your trigger. Okay? The reason that we talk a lot about triggers is because we need to know why we do what we do. If we figure out what triggered you to feel that way or what triggered you to choose a destructive behavior, might be a relapse, might be something that you're trying to avoid, might be something that set off your anxiety or a panic attack, right? We want to know what it is so we can work on it. A trigger isn't something that you identify so that you forevermore never expose yourself to that. The idea is we identify it so we can work on it. A trigger is not a cause. I don't know if you guys are familiar with causation versus correlation, right? This thing might be linked to this correlation versus this thing causes this. Triggers are not a cause of a behavior. triggers correlate to a behavior. So if blank is a trigger for you, it's where were you on the path of crap you were going through that this trigger was the straw that broke the camel's back that pushed you to do the destructive behavior that you were trying to avoid? Or what about that trigger, meaning the antecedent, what about this event that came before the whatever it pushed and created afterwards, meaning the panic attack, the threat response, the elevated heart rate, whatever that is. We identify it so we can work on it. Let me give you an example. I was working with a teenager, and I primarily work with adults. But in this case, it was a teenager, and she told me that she was at a friend's house. Now, for backstory, she has a father who tends to voice his side of things at a very loud volume. She was at the sleepover. That particular child comes from a family where they express themselves loudly. Not a problem. That's what they do in their home. She explained to her friend that her dad is abusive, that he yells all the time, and that she wants her friend to not yell, and she expects the same from her family. I explained to this young lady that while I respect that, and I hope her friend did too, and it's totally reasonable to tell your friend this particular behavior can make me uncomfortable, that it is not her place necessarily to go into the home of somebody else and tell them how they will conduct themselves in their home. She can share that with her friend and ask her if she wouldn't mind lowering the volume of her voice. But ultimately, she needed to decide if she thinks that she could learn to cope with that behavior, or if she's going to choose not to have sleepovers there anymore. Because while we want to identify triggers, we're identifying them so that we can work on them. We don't blame the trigger for our behavior. We identify them so that we can work on them, so that they're no longer a trigger. It doesn't mean from now until the day you die, you have to avoid blank. It means we identify it so that we can reduce its control over you. And then additionally, we have to remember that I do and I don't. I was going to say, I wish we lived in a world where everybody could just respect what everybody else wants and needs. But to be totally honest, that would be exhausting. I mean, even as a therapist, I can try, but I don't have the mental wherewithal or just the memory space to remember what every single person that I come in contact might want at any given moment. The thing is, you can say what you want or what your triggers are, but the general population has zero obligation to adjust for you. And that's why you do things like go to therapy, so that you can work on those triggers, so that you can be out there in the world and you don't have to stay home. And you can go and live your life without having to isolate and hole up because someone might do the thing or because you might encounter the thing. This has varying degrees of difficulty. I'm not going to lie to you and say that it's easy. But I want to make sure that that's real clear, because it's a pattern I really, really notice of people thinking, well, I explained this to them. You can explain it to them, but just because you say something does not mean that they have an obligation to change the way they do things. You've said it, and hopefully, if this is a member of your immediate family or your partner, that they would do their best to fix that, but they don't necessarily have an obligation to. And the other big thing that I see that's a huge pattern I'm seeing more and more lately is that while I think it's amazing that people are learning about triggers and learning where those come from and how it affects their behavior, and I don't think everyone uses them as an excuse. Some people do. Some people are like, oh, well, this triggered me. That's why that happened. That might have happened, but you still did blank. So let's not blame that sad song, how that made you think of your ex, and then I don't know what happened. the bottle of wine just dumped itself down in my throat. I mean, that might be convenient, but that's not what happened, and that's not how it works. It didn't make you do anything, right? It's not a cause. It might be a correlation, not causation. So we have to remember that a trigger is an antecedent. And not everybody uses it as an excuse, but I think there is a misconception that when people hear trigger, they think, oh, well, this is a trigger for me, so this is just a problem I have. Yes, but it doesn't have to be. It is. Now you've identified it. Beautiful. But the second step of therapy, which is often lost on people, like a lot of people will say, oh, well, I figured out the source of my problems. It's my dad, my mom, this incident, that event, these circumstances. But then there's that follow-up question that lots of people miss, which is, okay, fabulous. And that is a breakthrough. We figured out where it came from. Great. We figured out what that trigger is. But now what are you going to do about it? And that's the choice you have to make, is now we figured out what that trigger is. What are you going to do about it? I don't want you to have to be a hermit in a log cabin on the side of some mountain somewhere. So how are you going to fix it? How are you going to adapt? What are you going to do about it? Because unfortunately, while I think you're a beautiful, wonderful snowflake, and I love you, and I will adjust my behavior to support you, the rest of the world does not give a shit that that's what your trigger is. So together, we figure out how to help you deal with that. And I just want to make sure that that's clear, because I'm definitely seeing that to be a pattern lately, that people identify triggers and then they don't know what to do from there. And it's just an antecedent. It is not a cause. It didn't make anything happen, because you know what? All those people in the same room with you, they aren't triggered. That didn't make them do anything else. So it's specific to you. It's just an antecedent. So ideally what we could do is catch that way before, so it's not the straw that breaks the camel's back and pushes you to that destructive behavior. If we're talking about something like maybe purging or relapse, if we're talking about addiction, or if it's something like PTSD, you know, it might be that loud noise that you couldn't prep for. But if we learn it, if we learned how to manage the anxiety level, maybe that startling noise wouldn't have quite the same effect, because we would overall teach you how to stay in a relaxed body. Specific to PTSD, and kind of like what we were just talking about with the with yoga and its true ability to help with PTSD is being able to keep those muscles relaxed. So if we could teach how to stay in that relaxed body, maybe that trigger still startles you, but it doesn't send you into a full-blown panic attack. So what could we do before those triggers hit so that they aren't as severe? But if we just look at them as, well, that's my trigger, now I'm screwed, then you're absolutely right. If the outlook is, as soon as that thing happens, there's not a damn thing I can do about it, then there's not a damn thing you can do about it. But I propose that there's another option, which is we identify it, and then we do something about it. So that's my thought for the day. I hope you guys are doing well. Do not give up on yoga. That was not what I meant. I just worry because sometimes people will say, well, I tried yoga, it didn't help. And I find out they went to like 3 classes at the local Y, or yoga in the park with like all the kids at the jungle gym, like screaming 3 feet away. And I'm like, oh no, that's not what they mean. So wanted to clarify. And then I think, I love that there's so much more information out there now with mental health in general, but I think sometimes without context, people can be at a loss. So just like to clarify those things. Anyway, if you guys need anything, let me know. You know to reach out. You know where to find me. Have a great day, and never effing settle.